Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to this episode of A Date with Darkness podcast. Super excited to be back here chatting with you. If you are a new watcher, welcome to the show. New listener, welcome to the show. If you are an OG subscriber, welcome back. I'm glad to have you here. And thanks so much for supporting the small channel. So I'm super excited to be talking with you. And again, we are doing the webinar on, recovering from down low partnerships, and those will be placed down in the show notes. So if you are, a woman who is married to or in partnership with a man who is living a secretly gay lifestyle, and if you are a man who is living a secretly gay lifestyle or engaging with a man who is in a secretly gay lifestyle, definitely show up and support. We would love to have you at the webinar that's coming up later in October. So super excited to chat with you. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about my work as a therapist and talk a little bit about how Black male narcissists show up in therapy. And this podcast isn't meant to be degrading or disrespectful. It's just to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've seen and that I've encountered clinically in my work with male narcissists in therapy, right? And so I want to make that very clear that I'm want to be respectful of everyone that's involved, but I do want to share a little bit about how how they may show up clinically in the room. And I've worked in a number of settings, so I'm going to talk about a combination of just my work and my education in a number of different settings, from EAP to hospital to corrections to even private practice, and things like that. So that's definitely where I'm drawing my experience. I may draw a little bit from personal experience too, but just to give you an idea of where, what I'm talking about, where am I getting this from, and what's my educational background in order to be able to talk about that. Okay. So just to give you a little bit, and I'm not just talking, I'm not here to perpetuate a bias. I'm not here to perpetuate stereotypes or negativity. It's just a little bit about what I see clinically. Trying to think, I may or may not sprinkle in some of what my interventions are in terms of how that works. It just depends on how I'm feeling and just how I'm flowing throughout this podcast, simply because I'm recording podcasts back to back here. So I may try to sprinkle in some of that. And just for context of this show, I'm well aware, I've treated lots of narcissists, both male and female, and I may do another show on females coming up here, but that's not the next one that I have planned, but I'll probably throw one in there. But so I've worked with a variety of people from all sorts of cultural backgrounds that are narcissistic, from Middle Eastern, Afghanistan, Iranian, white, Black, Hispanic, you name it. I've worked, Asian. So I've worked with a lot of Southeast Asian even. So I've worked with a lot of folks from different backgrounds. I just thought I would kind of put this out there a little bit because I haven't really seen a show or heard of anybody talking about this from a clinical perspective, so I thought I would just do that. So this podcast isn't meant to perpetuate any sort of stereotype, bias, prejudice, or racism, but basically just to sort of talk about some of the clinical experience that I've had in treating and working with certain personality types from a specific demographic background. The other thing I was going to say is, again, I recognize that I'm talking about narcissism. So some of this can apply to multiple different, it can apply to men of different cultures, other cultures in relative to what I'm talking about. But I want to talk a little bit about today, how it manifests in my own culture, which is African American culture. And while I'm talking about each concept that I want to expand on, I may mention, I may throw in there, where I was working, or what sort of clinical setting it was in and where I saw certain things manifest. And so I recognize that certain narcissistic traits can be applicable no matter what race or culture. So I don't need a reminder of that in this podcast, but I just want to talk a little bit about how I've seen it show up. So again, talking about Black male narcissists in therapy. So specifically, so a lot of times when I work with people who have narcissistic traits or who have narcissistic personality disorder, the reason that they end up showing up in therapy with me, or when they have showed up in therapy with me, is it's either court mandated or they have we're in corrections, so it's part of what they're required to go through while they're in corrections, or probation or pretrial, or part of probation or pretrial, their requirements for their case, or they're in a marriage or partnership and their partner is finito, donezo, ready to walk out the door unless they go to therapy. So, that's when they show up in my private practice. Occasionally, I do have people that are, again, not on the severe end of the scale, but more so. They have narcissistic traits or they're mild to moderate. And they come to therapy on their own because they're already suspecting that they are. Um, and they just want to see if I can diagnose them with that. And so a lot of times when people come in that way, which is not the norm, right? But they kind of just want to see, but they're already suspecting that. What they'll tend to do is they'll withhold a lot of information. And a lot of times diagnostically, I can already tell, by the way people fill out my paperwork. And I have pretty specific paperwork and that I've sort of tailored over the years to sort of draw out certain responses from people. And so I know based on how they fill out my paperwork, I can pretty much, I would say about my paperwork is about 95% accurate in that I could sort of tell based on how they fill it out and what sort of responses I'm getting, what I'm going to be, working with by the time it rolls around, and then when I do therapy, I do consultations and things like that. So those two things will usually tell me, again, because I've tailored it, because I've worked with folks so much over the years that I've kind of tailored it based on my clientele, because people usually come to see me of one or two reasons for therapy services. Usually they are a victim of narcissistic abuse, or they have identified themselves or someone else has identified them as a narcissist and they're coming for treatment. But those are, just to give you a general context of how under what conditions I've normally seen people. And most of the time when people are coming in, even if they come in on their own volition, or if it's court mandated, they don't want to be there, right? They don't feel like they, even if they suspect that they might be a narcissist, they still don't necessarily feel like they have a problem per se, if that makes sense. It just almost kind of becomes a game. Like, let me see how smart you really are, right? And a lot of times what I've heard from my clients in particular is like, some variation of like, they kind of they want to test my mental scope to see if I'm as smart as I really am, if this is all what it's cracked up to be. Because I do think, and I've spoken about this on TikTok or something else, I do think a large part of it is like, um, in particular, I met with this challenge more so from my own race than others per se. Is that like, oh, if you're a Black doctor, I don't know if you're as smart or as qualified as other non-Black doctors for the simple fact that you are a Black. So there's like a questioning of legitimacy of credentials or um, intellect based on the fact that I'm Black alone, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense the way that I put that out there. Um, and so there is um, Eric Byrne is I think he's a psychologist or was a psychologist. He was he was part of transactional analysis in psychology, and basically in transactional analysis he talks about a lot about games that people play, and I think you could probably get those his books, like they're way back when, probably on Amazon or your public library or something like that. But games people play. And so a lot of it is with narcissism, black male narcissists, when they show up. In particular, there is like this game playing, right? And part of the first step of the playing of the game and working with these folks is like, let's challenge your authority. Let me see what I can get away with. And this is across all settings. I want to challenge your authority, and I want to, there may be an intimidation component, but let me see what I can get away with. Let me not be honest. Let me withhold information. Let me see if I can outsmart you in this, because again, it can appear to be a game of manipulation, master manipulation. And so there is that part of it where it's like there's a challenge of that. Let's challenge the power differential in the room, because that's the other thing in terms of the game is like challenging the power, like, you're not better than me because I'm the man in the room, so let me try to appear to be more powerful than you, even though I'm coming to see you as a doctor, as a therapist, as a person that's going to help me. You're not helping me because I'm the most powerful person. So let me tell you something, right? Not you're telling me something, but let me tell you something, and let me try to, show up in this way to outsmart you, to break you down, or challenge your authority. And so, especially in prison where you kind of get those more extreme personalities, I definitely had men who would want to challenge authority, and don't let there be an audience of other men, which there oftentimes was, and such as like if I'm doing like group therapy or we're out in a public space, like on the yard, like, let me really challenge your authority because, you ain't shit to me, and that's just kind of how it would come across. It's like, okay, well, let me be disrespectful. Let me be out of pocket. Let me yell. Let me just get up and walk out. And anybody who's worked with me in prison, they know that I don't play around, right? So my boundaries are very firm, and I would, people would get disciplined in a second when they act up. Right. And so what have I experienced? Because I've experienced some outlandish behavior, and where people have tried to challenge authority, right? Because that's part of the personality. Like, I don't have a respect for authority too, right? But also too, if you're a woman, if they're misogynistic, right? If there's any sort of internalized racism, that's really going to come to play. So I've had people like cause a scene and cuss me out, right? Or, call me out of my name and things like that, which is a big no-no. I've had a person, try to make it seem as though I'm like just a feeble woman. Oh, sweetheart, baby, just try to, be very inappropriate in that way, or people that just be downright inappropriate and do the most physical thing that they could do, which is put their feet up on my desk, something like that, right? Where they just really are just like, okay, this is, I wipe my butt with people like you. You can get out of here. And this is how I'm gonna show up and disrespect you. And so that's more in the prison sense. Where you get some of those more extreme, like displays of disrespects and challenges of authority. You're a black woman, how smart can you be? Type of stuff. And like, you can't really help me because you're a woman and so we're going to balance the power. The other thing is like, the name, there's people that try to get around, calling me Dr. Jones, and things like that. And so they'll try to get away with doing the first name or, just some derivation of my last name, like Jonesy or, something like that. Just something to try to let me see how far I can push this envelope and get away with being disrespectful, even in the smallest way, right? And so that's kind of how that manifests, right? There's the charming and flirtatious bit, right? So let's see, if I could be charming and flirtatious with you, such as calling you babe or whatever. And I think this, again, this comes out, although this has come out in private practice, it's come out in prison. And make no mistake, there are a lot of men that are very flirtatious and overly sexual with a personality disorder, right? And that shows up regardless of race or what have you. But I think with me in particular, I think it's been pushed the furthest with African American men, with me. That's been my experience. So, an example, and I'll share this example. Like, for example, one of the things that you may have to talk about or what I've had to talk about is behavior that's inappropriate. So, sticking to the boundaries around calling me the correct name, or if you are sexually inappropriate, for example, and you have to talk with people about being sexually inappropriate, and then if it gets to be a little too weird, then they just have to go and talk to somebody else, period. Like, because there's only so much that I can do and so much I'm willing to do. But if you so for example, you may have to talk with someone who wants to come to therapy with his shirt open, right? And people that just kind of, hey, this isn't a place that you want to do that, so you kind of want to button up your clothes and things like that. When I worked in prison, you'd have to, uh, which this is a part that I really dislike. You would have to go and see inmates. Sometimes you'd have to go see them in their cell if there's like a lockdown or whatever. And sometimes, you got to go up on the tiers. So in tiers, when you have to walk up those floors and you have to go around and see them up on the second floor, and there's not a whole lot of wiggle room, and up on the tiers, they have showers. And every prison may be different, but the showers are like, you know, it's like this little partition that's covering. It's not a lot of coverage there, but unfortunately, you got to walk past that. Whether it's me, whether it's anybody's got to go up there and do like a cell side. You have to walk past that, and sometimes people they want to stop and chat. Like, can you stop and talk to me? Oh, I'm taking a. That's inappropriate. No, I can't stop and chat. We're not. This isn't your house. We can't do that. That's totally inappropriate. So they want to stop and chat while they're doing that. Like I said, like, showing up in various stages of undress. And I think that's probably where I've been pushed the furthest, where people want to show up. Men have wanted to show up or have shown up in various stages of undress. And I mean, I've had that happen where, like, I've worked in a suite and someone has shown up in a pretty extreme stage of undress, and my colleagues were like, they're all looking like, what the hell's going on, and so it's been kind of that. It's like, when I talk to them and then they continue to show up in various stages of undress, then it becomes a problem, a big, big, big problem, which is a problem from the beginning, but it just becomes a big problem. And what's interesting about the stages of undress, there's a lot of these like sort of male coaches for women that, sort of preach about narcissism and things like that now, like, oh, this is what you should look for and blah, blah, blah. And again, regardless of race or color, ethnicity and all that, nationality, all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that's definitely a telltale sign that this person is, may have some of the personality traits that I'm talking about here is what's interesting is what you will always see is like at some point, this male coach that's coaching women, right, will show up at a stage, like will just pop up on social media in a stage of extreme undress. Like they'll just show up without clothes on, or they'll show up in a very sexually inappropriate way. And for me, that's always like the telltale sign of like, here we go. Like this is kind of how that may manifest. And this isn't all people, all men, that all African American male that have narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder. So I want to specify that, but it does happen frequently enough. And what's interesting is like, in a prison setting, you're kind of working, everybody knows who their therapist is, but then you have people that aren't even on your caseload that kind of want to show up in a way, because then again, it becomes this game of like, look at me, like, look at me, look at, and so it's like it's just wanting this attention. So if you're seen as being like attentive and like being involved with your caseload, other people who have clinicians that aren't involved or who are not at work, other folks would then want you to show up for them, and so they then want attention too, right? And so I think that's the thing, is like it becomes this game about attention in private practice mostly, but also, in other settings too. You have, and this happens a lot with those whom are married. And what's interesting, is race always sort of shows up in this way. And what I've noticed in working with Black male narcissists is particularly those who are not married to African American women, is that there is a perseveration, especially sexually, on their exes, right? And exes and or sneaky links, people that that they didn't make it to this stage with, and so normally they're having some marital problems. But one of the things that I've noticed clinically is that there is again sort of this rumination or this thinking about, or possibly obsession about exes who happen to be African American, where they've sort of married this other person that's not, and they're having all of these complications. But and I think this sort of, I don't necessarily think it has anything to do with the spouse. It's more or less this escapism or this fantasy-based behavior. But what I've noticed a lot that tends to happen is that when they engage in this, it's typically with someone who is identified as the same ethnicity as them. And so, more often than not, that's what I see, is like there's sort of this perseveration on the life that we had and how much fun it was. And, sort of there's this comparison, and you could sort of see how they compare across the spectrum or across the timeline with the people that they're with, right? Another thing that I've seen, and again, this is again in the correctional setting, is, and it wasn't necessarily even with people that I worked with, but also like these corrections is very interesting. It could be with the people that I worked with, but also too, it could show up in the people that I wasn't even working with, but just would sort of observe me from afar and like working with my caseload. And so there were, people that weren't even necessarily my clients or anything like that, or weren't even necessarily in the therapy program. They would just sort of, inmates watch everything, right? They watch everything. They watch everybody, right? So it would just be sort of like, an observation, right? And an observation would be like, if they had things that they admired about you, they would want to absorb that into their personality, right? And like, especially, in my institution where we had, transgenders, where you had male transitioning to female, a lot of times they would observe me and they would be like, and they're not even on my caseload or anything like that, or, clients or anything like that, but they're just people that they want to take certain parts of your personality and sort of absorb that and then sort of become you in this place, right? So they want to embody you because I guess, or me, I guess, because, for whatever reason, people were attracted to that, right? And so it's interesting that like people want to take certain characteristics or identify or align themselves closely with you or your character traits, if that makes sense, because that then makes them more attractive, or they feel that that then makes them more attractive. So there is a part of, and as you know, which I've talked about on this channel before about narcissism is that narcissists, even when you're dating or when your family members or whatever, they absorb or they try to absorb and take from your personality. And so the same thing is also true, and sort of trying to do that. One of the things that I've noticed, in addition to the power differential or trying to humble, so to speak, the difference of power, humble me, or the difference of power, there's like this ability to try and oppress. So again, this in prison, this can come across as like trying to intimidate or trying to talk about or in a way that's not good, right? Or try to, and that didn't happen a lot. Or what I will say is that happens more so in the beginning, when you're meeting someone, like I don't want you, I don't like you, but I don't feel like I should have to be here, and so I'm gonna sort of act out a little bit, and I'm gonna try my best to humble you, right? And I think that happens in the beginning. And when I say beginning, I think maybe like the first session, and then after that, most of the time we're cool, right? Because it's like as long as I'm here and I'm doing my job and I show respect, most people they kind of fall in line with that. Like if you're respectful to me, I'll be respectful to you. But and I may try to challenge authority here and there to try to rabble rouse, but if I want to, if most people, they like when they get to a certain place, especially in prison, if it's safe, and if it's, if they get good benefit, from being there, as opposed to being in a general population where you could be housed with the worst of the worst or whatever. They rather try to stay in a place where it's comfortable. So even if they can sort of make certain allowances as long as certain things get done. And so, after we sort of acclimate to each other, accommodate to each other, then it's pretty much out of the way. But there is this sort of trying to oppress, humble, right, intimidate, be inappropriate. And so that could show up in a way, clinically, right? One of the things that I'll say about boundaries, especially in prison or even in therapies, I always have boundaries. Like I don't, clients aren't friends. We don't have a relationship outside of therapy. We just don't, right? And this has been most pushed Black male narcissists in therapy, and I think I've spoken about this before, but it's specifically where, especially when you're working with people that have antisocial, traits and things like that, or borderline personality, extreme antisocial, borderline, or even narcissistic personality disorder traits. I feel like there was a show about this. Maybe it was Oz or something like that. It used to come on HBO, but they want to try to research and find out everything about you. They are detectives in there. And I mean, even in private practice, people are they're very much detectives. They want to know who they're working with, what your credentials are, because they only want to be with the best of the best, but they just want to know who you are. And they want to find out everything that they can about you. And if they like you, they may try to, push a relationship, right? Or want to have more of a relationship with you than what is appropriate. And what I have found is in certain cases, and again, these are extreme cases, um, and it's never, knock on wood, been a situation where I've been in danger or anything, but where you have people that try to research me out or call me on my business phone and want to come have a conversation or have a relationship beyond, what client, therapist, or whatever. And there has to be a reminder, like, this cannot go further than that. And what I have found, in working with this specific demographic, and again, this is for me, this has only happened with this specific demographic of people. What I have found is like when I said no, and like I reminded them of what's appropriate and even reported to the appropriate authorities, what I found is that they will then also, or have in the past, recruited their mom, and their mom has then started to do the outreach and wanting to hang out and do things like that. So there's like this boundary pushing, um, thing of like, and again, it's only happened with this specific of demographic for me. This has been the only time where, of course, Dr. Jones is on the internet and things like that. But again, people that want to push the boundary of the relationship, beyond what it's supposed to be. And in particular, when I left certain roles, whatever the case may be, there's like, okay, well, let me reach out to you via social media. Let me have these other people contact you to try and see, if we can turn this into a thing, because in their mind they know, or they feel like they know that, oh, Dr. Jones wants to push it there and take it there with me, and so we can possibly do something beyond that now. And so there's a you have to put hard boundaries there, and that can be very intimidating and frustrating at the same time, because, I have a job to upkeep and a role, and, I'm very, very serious about boundaries and things like that. Like, yeah, yeah. So you definitely have to keep putting that up, and you have to take certain measures for that to implement that. So those are just some of the things that I've encountered, and I'm going to try to talk about it in the um, most respectful as possible, and just some of the things that have come up for me. Um, but also, yeah, just some of the things. And then there's other things that have come up where, like, oh, things can't go their way, right? And then what's interesting is like, when people try to push the envelope or they want certain things, and again, this is more so in corrections than in my private practice or whatever, settings. It's like, oh, then it's like, you're racist towards me, or you're this or you're that, you aren't for the people, you aren't, so there's this quick, you know there's this frustration, and then quick to degrade, and then sort of call me on my name, or say that I have this particular personality, trait, so those sorts of things do come up. But yeah, so those are some of the things that I've encountered, in therapy. And so hopefully, let me know what you think. Would love to know more of your thoughts. There again, it's not meant, this isn't comprehensive, because I know I didn't think of everything, just some quick notes and whatnot. And again, I know this might not be specific to just my race, but these are just some of my experiences there, and it's not meant to be degrading or anything like that, but just sort of, some of the things that I've encountered over the years in my professional career and working with a particular demographic. All right, so until next time, you guys take care of yourselves, be well, and see you next time. Bye.